I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't defend my co-workers. And shamefully, I didn't say anything to them after. I didn't go to them and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It was deeply inappropriate. Are you okay? And I've sat with this story now for decades.
The Imperfects invites you into a very safe place. A place where we share without judgment and drink heaps of vulnerability. Grab yourself a cup. This is the Vulnerability House.
It's not often that we get repeat guests on the podcast. It's we truly love someone.
Yeah.
When we desperately want them back on the podcast. And today, Ben Shewry. I don't ever call you Ben Shewry to your face, Ben, but yes, Ben Shewry. Hello, Ben Shewry.
Hello. And what an absolute privilege and an honour to be back on with you guys. I've been so looking forward to this.
Well, someone, after your last episode you did with us, someone commented, they just did an emojis. It was a chef hat and then it was mind-blowing emoji, and then I didn't get the third one as a palm tree. I didn't get that reference, but I agree with them up into the palm tree. It was chef, extraordinaire, mind blowing, and
palm tree.
Yeah. Holiday? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was. I spent probably a bit too long puzzling over that one, but
yeah, it's got me now.
To the extent where you brought it up on the following episode.
You were mind blowingly good last time, and so it was a no-brainer to get you back on, this time into the tea house.
Who's Ben Shewry, Hugh?
Well,
for the 10 people who don't know.
Dear, wonderful friend of ours. He is the owner of Attica, which is one of Australia's best restaurants. He is one of the world's best chefs. If you didn't listen to the last episode that we did with Ben, we'll put a link in the show notes. It was a wonderful episode, so we are so happy to have you back today. How are you, Ben?
Yeah. I'm good. I'm in the middle of a bit of a maelstrom, and so it's very kind of intense.
What a word.
Yeah.
What a word.
Yeah, just remind me what that is again. I know.
Well,
I know every word, but just
effectively, it's like being at the center of a tornado, or something like that. I mean, literally, I know if I was literally at the center of a tornado, I wouldn't be talking to you right now, probably.
Yes.
Unless I was strapped to something. But
but you've made commitment though. You're in the middle of a tornado.
I am
still doing the podcast.
It's a self-created tornado.
Yeah.
And there's this Radiohead song that I was listening to as I came here, and in the restaurant we often use music to pump ourselves up before the performance, the service, and so I'm listening to this Radiohead song, which I've forgotten because I'm terrible with names, but it has an ending where the guitar is just spiraling and spiraling and spiraling, and it starts to break up as I imagine the musician brings the guitar close to the amp and it starts to split up and splinter and sort of self-destruct, and I was like, wow, this is kind of how this moment feels like.
It's amazing.
Wow.
I very specifically thought on the way to do Ben's interview, I need to listen to a song because I felt like that's something you would do, and you did do that.
Yeah.
What did you listen to, Hugh?
Well, I was in the driveway and I thought I want to feel really emotional. I feel like I need to feel emotional for Ben's interview. That's the headspace I wanted to get into, and I listened to I've mentioned the song before, but I listened to Slip Sliding Away by Paul Simon.
Really thought you were going to say Slipknot.
I thought you were going to say Slipknot too. I was like, I'm not making the connection right now. But whatever gets you going,
Yeah. Slip sliding away.
Slip Sliding Away by Paul Simon. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
The nearer your destination, the more you slip sliding away. Anyway, it's
for context, the reason you're in the maelstrom is because you've just released your book, Uses for Obsession, and you're talking to everyone. You're doing talks, you're doing interviews, launches, you're all over the shop doing everything. And so just for people's context, that's why it's all going on for you.
That's correct.
Yeah. Wow.
It feels very appropriate that we're doing this today, and it was sort of half by design, but also very much by coincidence. I've been reading the book, and it's not a cookbook by any means, but there are a couple of recipes in there for
Oh, he's
bolognese.
cooking. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Let the man cook.
And
Thanks, dude.
well done. And I spent Saturday cooking the bolognese, the first of the 3 bolognese recipes in the book, and I've frozen it and it's ready for dinner tonight. And I'm so excited. So it feels like a very appropriate day to be.
Well, and you said it was your second time round. You didn't really feel like you.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't nail it. I didn't read the chapter properly, and I tried to reduce the quantities and make a smaller batch. I'm like, I'll just make a small batch. And then in cooking, I'm like, this doesn't seem to be working as well. Then I reread the chapter. I'm like, oh, you cannot shrink the size. It has to be the full batch. So this is the first time I've done it with a full batch.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you're on your way to joining my bolognese cult then.
I'm
You're
a
one
wanton.
step
Yeah.
of 3.
Yeah, the third step, I'm not sure I can do with small children. I think I need to wait till I'm a bit older and matured a little bit.
You only need a week to make it. What are you complaining about?
yeah, I've got spent plenty of time.
So
at the
much
moment
time.
to-
Yeah.
You got to make your own bacon.
And I suggest that you buy a fancy pan as well. I mean, I'm not really expecting anybody to do that.
Buy the pan. I look for an excuse to buy a fancy pan though, so I think I might have to.
Our mutual friend Simon
Yes.
did buy that
Yeah.
fancy pan and a whole heap of other things because he was the recipe tester.
Wow. Okay.
Professor Simon Bell.
Exactly, the professor.
Can I have that job next time you write a book?
Oh my goodness, if I knew you'd wanted that job, I would have passed over Simon.
So is this taste tester or like no?
No, recipe tester.
I've got to do the cooking.
You've got to cook the recipes and give
Actually,
me feedback.
I'm retracting my offer.
Oh.
I'm not a cook.
Oh, okay, all right.
I couldn't do it.
I'll hasten to remind you, you cooked a delightful pasta once when we went away.
That's true.
That
I
was
did.
delightful.
No,
Yeah.
you've cooked a delightful pasta for me before
No,
as
Jam-
well.
Jam-
Jammed it.
Jam
Oh my
cooked
goodness,
that.
now I'm going to get in trouble with
Yeah.
Jam.
No, and I just copied Jam. What for you?
Was it the same pasta?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's your signature pasta, right?
It's my only pasta. Let's call
Okay.
it a signature.
And it's jams.
Exactly. Okay, so this is the Vulnerability House. For those who don't know, the way this works is we have a deck of cards in front of you, Ben, and on each card there is a question written on it, and you'll pick 3 cards from the top of the deck, and if one of those questions sparks some sort of memory or vulnerable feeling or story, then we welcome you to share it with us. But you can just keep picking cards until something sparks with you, if you like. So Ben, please
Okay.
pick
all right.
pick your cards.
Oh, scary. Now, the first one is, what is your proudest moment?
Mm.
Second, what was your biggest fear as a young person? And third, when was a time you stayed silent and regretted it?
I'm reading the book at the moment, so I'm sure like I can think of examples from the book actually, for at least two of those 3. But not that you have to say anything from the book or anything, but
No, thanks.
not that you have to promote the book if you don't want to. But I'm totally up to you.
I hold 2 views on regret sometimes, and that's that sometimes I think I live without regrets, but then I know I don't.
Mm.
And I think it's kind of narcissistic to live without regrets. I think we all have things we regret. So I think for me, this is going to be, when was a time you stayed silent and regretted it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow, hey.
Before you start, it's a very terrible time for you to bring this up, but can I just ask who's on your T-shirt?
Sharon Van Etten.
Oh, yeah.
Who's an incredible singer-songwriter,
singer.
musician from Los Angeles, California.
A male or a female?
Female?
Yep.
Awesome.
She's amazing.
I don't know Sharon.
Mm.
And I couldn't, because she's wearing a singlet, and it's quite see-through, and I didn't know if it was a male or a female, and I didn't know if it was. I thought I was looking at her male's nipple, and I was like, that's fine. And then I realised maybe I'm not, and maybe I've been looking for too long at that.
I've never noticed that.
Have you heard a word we've said so far?
That's the weirdest time to bring that up as well.
And not only bring it up, but to go deep on his thoughts.
I needed to explain why I needed to know who Sharon was, but then
I'm very distracting to you. I know this now. No,
No.
I'm just going to put a hand over that.
Yeah,
Hugh.
no, it's fine. No, I wasn't looking as in, oh, look at that. I was curious to know
Keep going.
what am I looking at here.
Yeah.
And-
I'm curious. Interesting.
Well, I think Sharon Van Etten's a tremendous person to ask about.
Yeah.
Yes, I look forward to doing more research. Well, I'm doing more research, but
I bet you're going to do more research. Google image.
Anyway.
Okay, so Hugh, perfect time to bring up
Yeah.
that just before Ben launches into a vulnerable story. Sorry, Ben.
So, so do you want to go back to the question?
Yes,
Or-
yeah,
All right,
let's
have a look-
refresh.
Have a look at the question.
Definitely need a refresh.
Just in case that miraculously stays in.
There's no way to stay in.
When was a time you stayed silent and regretted it?
I'd say that already that shocks me because I feel like I've never met anyone who is better at saying what they think and standing up for having the courage and convictions is like a bit of a almost like a cliched thing of something, but you live and breathe that every moment since I've ever met you.
100%.
Well, that's very kind of you, and that's certainly who I try to be. And I think it's who I am, for better or for worse. But I suppose like any person, you're always on some kind of journey of improvement, and I think what I hope for myself is that I get kinder and more thoughtful and gentler and have more empathy as I age. And I really do believe that's true of humans generally, But if I look back upon my younger self, and some people might say somewhat harshly, but that's who I am, there's definitely been some moments where I didn't live up to my own expectations. And one that jumps out and one that I wrote about in the book, and this is a hard story to share with you because I write that it's my greatest regret. And it's a ugly story, and it will be hard for some people to listen to this, I think. And the reality is that I'm in New Zealand and I'm about 23 years old, and I'm the sous chef to the Governor General of New Zealand at the time.
What does that mean to be a sous chef? That's
Second in charge.
okay. Yep.
Yep. And the Queen is coming to visit. And this is a really big deal. The Queen doesn't come to visit New Zealand very often, and we're the Queen's appointed servants as the employees of the Governor-General. And so the whole house has been sort of upended, and it's kind of like, something out of Downton Abbey, if you've ever watched that show, where, an eligible bachelor is coming to visit. And all of the servants, and we're the servants, are frantically painting everything and cleaning everything and organising everything for months and months and months. So finally, we are lined up at the entrance, the chefs and the waiters and all of the employees of the house, and on either side of the entrance inside the house. And the door opens and the Queen comes in, the Queen of England. And we've been told not to touch the Queen. And the Queen comes past us and nodding, and we're bowing.
When you say
curtsying.
don't touch the Queen, it's like don't shake her hand.
Don't physically touch
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
That's not cool.
Yeah.
And
Should go without saying, but
don't say anything either, actually, by the way.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then, so she passes by, and that's fine. And then Prince Philip comes into the room, and he's very jovial. He's sort of a jolly good chap. And he's the opposite. He's, shaking hands, and we're bowing and whatnot. And he goes past us, and it seems as if he's about to leave the hall. And all of a sudden he turns and says, "Where are all the savages?" And then as quickly as he says this, he chuckles to himself and swings around and leaves. And this complete and utter silence.
Whoa.
And I don't know what to do, and I don't know what to say.
I wonder if it's worth just giving some context as to what he meant by "where are all the savages."
Well, there's really only one way that statement can be taken. It's a purely and utterly racist statement aimed at the Maori people of New Zealand, of which were many who were standing there, many who were employees of the Governor-General. And I knew, instantly, of course, how devastating and horrible and abhorrent this statement is. And I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't defend my co-workers. And shamefully, I didn't say anything to them after. I didn't go to them and say, "I'm so sorry that happened to you. It was deeply inappropriate. Are you okay?" And I've sat with this story now for decades. And I write that it was my greatest regret because it was an immense failing of humanity on my behalf. I knew better. I'd been raised better. My mother has always been a strong anti-racist and taught me the importance of understanding that not all things are equal in the world and of my own privilege as a Pakeha.
I mean, you haven't come here for like validation. I mean, it's so on so many levels. I understand why at any age someone would freeze in that moment. It's so unexpected, so shocking. I think the shock of it is just would render a lot of people unable to sort of speak in that moment. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do, but I'm so curious to know, you've had many years to think about it. If that was to happen to you now in that situation, have you thought how you would respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would respond very differently today. I don't care who it was or how powerful they were. You know, it is my responsibility as an individual to have a conversation with that person about that line. I would say that I would prefer to call them in about it rather than call them out, but I absolutely know now that I wouldn't walk past that. And in a lot of ways, not trying to jump forward too much, because this process of kind of coming to this understanding of your own culpability within racism has been one that I've learned about through many years. And in some ways, this experience and my failing of my colleagues has been how I've been able to probably care more about the subject and connect with people on a deeper level around it. It's driven me, that failure, in a lot of ways. And I think that the problem with staying silent and not saying anything is greater than the impacts on those who you should be standing up for. It affects the individual a great deal too, because you get stuck with that guilt. So the reason why I wrote this chapter on racism was not just to say, if you're racist, feel terrible. It's more about always putting an example of my own shortcomings first. And so I don't really think that I have any place talking about racism unless I admit my own culpability in that conversation. And so this is why I use this story of Prince Philip to show how I failed and failed my colleagues, but also how I improved, and how it is upon all of us to, especially white people, or almost exclusively white people, to take this on. You know, and this is something that nobody really wants to talk about and nobody really wants to admit, but most of us have, you know, an extended member of the family who has a racist attitude or has, you know, some form of bigotry that they believe. And a lot of us will sort of sit back and say, well, that's just, you know, Uncle Frank or whoever it might be. You know, it's just the way they are. But I would implore the people who are listening is that it actually is our responsibility to have a conversation with that Uncle Frank and just go, you know, kindly, I would say, you know, what's your line of thinking when you talk like that? You know, what motivates you to say such a thing about a person as if they were subhuman? And sort of try to invite them to reflect upon what they're putting out there rather than sort of shouting at them, which is a much easier thing to do, to get really, really, really angry about it and to shut it down in that way. But I think, you know, for me at least, the problem with that approach, with the angry approach, and I get angry about the things I see, of course, but I also understand that my anger is a privilege of being white as well, you know. And what I would prefer to do is to have a conversation with the person, because I know what happens when we push people to the outside. They find other like-minded individuals and their belief systems become more entrenched and harder to stop. And we see this time and time again in a variety of ways in society, not only with racism, but in many backwards views.
It's a really good reminder because it is so tempting in those situations, if someone says something racist, to explain to them why they're wrong and to, maybe punish them or yell at them and sort of enter into this sort of debate of these two sides. Whereas what you're suggesting, which I think is it's such a great thing to remember in those situations, is to actually be curious and ask questions and try and understand why they've just said what they've said and where that belief maybe comes from. I think that does probably lead to a much more helpful conversation.
But yeah, just sort of asking them to see the human and why anybody would think that about another human being. It's devastating, But I think, just trying to hold the mirror up in a way that's maybe a little bit less confrontational and a little more reflective. I think if you can, I believe in the goodness of humans, and I'd like to think that we all have the chance to be better and that we're never really too far gone, I really believe that.
It also strikes me that you're showing that person the humanity that they're denying the person or the race that they're having a go at. So you're actually displaying an example of how you can show humanity in that situation.
Yeah, and I've got to be honest, I've been showing that kind of humanity, not on this subject particularly, but on different subjects when I've done the wrong thing time and time and time again, and in that, those kind people, they allowed me to retain my own dignity and reflect upon my behaviours in a way that was actually long-term beneficial to me and also potentially to that relationship.
It feeds perfectly into a question I've been wanting to ask because I'll share a story if you don't mind.
Please.
When my wife and I lived in Bangladesh for a year when we were a lot younger, I have this memory of being in a car, and this was more about, because what you were talking about before was certainly racism, but I think there's also power in there as well. And this was purely a power play, not racist. But the rich Bangladeshi guy had invited us out to dinner. We went to dinner, and on the way home, this guy was a bit drunk, and he had a driver, and the driver took a wrong turn, and he reacted. This guy would have been about 40, 45. Sophie and I were in the back seat, and he reacted with some of the most appalling behaviour I've ever seen. The driver took a wrong turn, and he grabbed the driver by the ear and pulled his ear as hard as he could and hit his head against the steering wheel.
Oh my God.
And started yelling at him and screaming at him. And I tried to stop him a little bit, but I could have done more. And it sort of diffused the situation temporarily. But then I sat in silence in the back of the car and didn't say anything to say to this guy, what the hell are you doing? Or call it out or call it in or anything. I was just in shock and appalled. And I'm feeling at the moment a sense of guilt and shame over not actively thinking about that incident more throughout my life, and motivating it to allow me to change or improve my behavior the way you have spoken about so beautifully. The question I have off the back of that story is that how do you move from a position of being silent and being regretful, which can often come with guilt and shame, which can often render people unable to act or change. How do you move from guilt and shame into a position of, okay, I'm going to do something about this and it's going to change the person I am?
It's a great question. Thanks for sharing that awful story.
Yeah, it's horrific.
That's a devastating thing to happen to that person and horrible to witness. For me, I think, I will always own that moment. That's not going anywhere, and I can write about it and I can talk about it here, but it's unforgivable. And but I won't let it define me, because it's my responsibility to change, and to change coming from that moment is to actually take a leap of faith and to admit my fears and to confront them and to take a risk and to be a little bit more fearless, to learn to confront it rather than to shy away from it. And I think that sort of journey or mentality is challenging initially because you make mistakes and you don't get the outcomes that you want to. And I'm certainly not coming from a perfect place on any of this. I'm just sort of trying to admit my own culpability in any given situation and understand that I, as an individual, have a role to play. And that begins, though, with ending this feeling of being stuck and powerless. And it starts with being vulnerable and taking a chance the next opportunity that presents itself. And I can think of examples where, you know, I did better, and I've since talked to the individuals involved, and it was a big moment for them, you know. And so maybe it was a moment of fear when I confronted another situation a little more head on and defended somebody. And look, just to be absolutely clear, racism is never okay. There's just no time, there's no example where it's justifiable or okay in our society, and there's never been a time that it was okay, but that it's certainly not okay in 2024. So I'm making zero excuses. But what I'm saying is if I allowed my fears to control me, and the next time, and for sure there will be a time in all of our lives when I was faced with a similar situation, if I let that one go, well, that's willful, you know, and that's willful damage to another human. And I think we're better than that. I know I'm better than that. So we have to take up the opportunity to get over ourselves because our experience or my experience as a white person is different than the experience of my friends of color or colleagues. It's just different, you know, and I'm paying attention. I'm listening, I'm trying to learn, I'm watching. And so I see the ways in which their lives are different, you know, and that's brutal to see, but I have to take responsibility for that because it's not the other way around, you know, it's not happening to me.
Just on the calling it in, calling it out, do you mind just, like I said, I get it, but like for people who,
of course you do,
who don't know the difference, can you explain calling it in, calling it out?
So I would say that neither is right or completely wrong, you know, but I would say that my belief and my experience is when we call people out in an angry way, we entrench their thoughts, their wrong thoughts, deeper. And because it becomes an attack on them, and so they're defensive, and they're like, you know what, I'm not taking this from you. I'm right, you're wrong. And so by calling somebody in, what I'm saying is to have a reasoned and principled conversation about what the person said or how they're thinking. You know,
it's the more curiosity.
It's the curiosity, but it's allowing them to reflect upon their behavior, and it's actually allowing them the dignity to change their attitude. And so if you call them out, you don't give them that chance. And, you know, I'm sure that there's going to be people listening think, oh, that's an outrage. It's an outrage. You know, we should be absolutely furious about this. I'm not saying don't be furious, but I'm saying think about how you could actually change that person's mindset rather than just pushing them to the edge where they will not change that mindset. You know, and that is my responsibility as a human to take that responsibility on and to have that reasoned and sensible conversation about it. You know, that's also empathy because the person that has a backwards thought or a negative mindset is in a bad place. You know, they're in a place of hate and anger, and there's something going on there. So how about we have a conversation about it rather than just yell at them and push them to the side?
Yeah.
Amazing said.
So just a quick story to maybe give that's a great answer. I love that answer.
Beautiful.
I've been through a similar type thing since 2020, which I've never shared with you guys. But it's a moment that I just wish I had back so much and regret so much and was silent. Through this podcast, through having Rana Hussein on, it gave me some inspiration on how to, work through it. So 2020, I was doing the one of my speaking tours, and I was in Newcastle, and this is right during COVID, and I was on stage. I started to feel really sick while I was on stage, but just because I was exhausted from touring, I just didn't think COVID. And then the next morning I woke up and went, oh, I'm really bad here. So I was going down to the pharmacist to try and get one of the tests. Feeling really bad. So I'm already making excuses. The COVID thing's irrelevant, but I'm just trying to make excuses for myself. But I heard a bit of a kerfuffle happening like outside a house, and it was on the main street in Newcastle where there's residential houses, and there was a couple arguing, having a really heated argument. And then she opened the door and put her hand out and said, well, you're not coming in. And he said, yes, I am. And no one else, I looked around, no one was really watching. And she was trying to close the door and not let him in. And she goes, you're not coming in. They did look very familiar. Like it seemed like they were, like they definitely knew each other very well. And then he said, this is fucking ridiculous. We need to sort this out. And then he sort of pushed her back into the house, and he went in and closed the door behind him. And I was looking around going, has anyone else seen that? Or is that just me? And no one else had, a few people had walked straight past, walked around them. But I was the only one who'd sort of stopped and watched the whole thing. And I just can't believe it. I didn't do anything. I just watched. I was like, that is really bad. I think they're just having a heated argument. I think there are a couple having, and I made all these excuses for it was probably okay. Mine was probably fine. And in my head, I'm like, chances are that's just a heated argument from a couple. I feel terrible. I'm just going to get this COVID thing and just go back to the hotel. And then the whole time, I just call the police. Like, just call the police and and then just wait until the police get here and check that everything's fine. I didn't do it. I went to the hotel and just slept for the rest of the day. And I felt, this was 2020, I felt so bad about it ever since. We were in Newcastle for our live show earlier this year, and we walked past the same place. And I was about to tell the story of it, but I just felt so ashamed of it. So I just didn't even tell you guys. Anyway, I think about it a lot, and I think about what happened and worry about what happened. But I was checking the news, like I was on the, always on Googling Newcastle domestic violence. So I just, for a good few months afterwards. Anyway, I've always been thinking well, the next time that happens, I'm going to be so good in that situation. I will never make that mistake again. And I've been looking at that exact scenario going, when I see a man being physically dominating a woman or being intimidating, I'm going to step in absolutely. And I've been waiting for that moment to sort of to try and help me move past the shame I felt for that incident. We had Rana Hussain on. She told a story about how she was standing at a really busy train station, and there were a group of young men who were really boisterous around her. She started to get worried, and she looked around feeling very isolated and very alone. And comedian Dave Thornton was there, and he saw her, and he gave her a really supportive smile and nod as if to say, I'm here, you're okay. And as she said, I thought, God, that's it. Why am I looking for these really big moments? It's small moments. There are little moments where you can look out for someone who is feeling, and it doesn't have to be the exact same issue. But I was on a flight a couple of months ago, and a lady, I was in the same aisle as a lady. I was on the window seat. She was right down the other, she was on the same aisle, but on the window seat the other side. So we're 6 seats apart. And she got up to get something out of the overhead thing just before we took off. And her bag, it was just a light bag, fell out and landed on a guy's head. And he goes, for fuck's sake, really loud, and just shook his head. And she said, I'm so sorry. And he goes, fucking hell, really loud. He wouldn't look at her. He just kept shaking his head. And she went to put her head around to say, I'm really sorry. And he put his hand up in her face and said, fuck off,
that. God.
I was like, oh, well, this is, the air hostess came straight down. The girl was really visibly shaken up. And I was like, well, this is where I show her that I saw it and it's not okay. But the plane was taking off. I couldn't get up, and she's right down the other side looking quite shaken up. And so I'm literally leaning as far forward as I can with this massive smile on my face, looking at her for
trying
to get her attention. I looked at her for so long, and eventually I think she was like, I think someone's looking at me. And she very slowly turned her head to see what someone was looking at. I think she was feeling very embarrassed as it was and very shaken. And then there's me, silly smile, just looking at her. I was trying to nod, and I was like, well, how do I do this face here? But the second we made eye contact and I was smiling and nodding her, she got so teary. And I was like, well, that's what Rana was talking about. It's looking out for it doesn't have to be a big redemption moment where you make it about you. This is where I made up for the error that I made by not. It's just continually look out for other people who might feel a little alone in that moment for whatever reason. And I learned that from Rana, and I need to let Rana know that. But it was quite impactful.
I love that. Yeah, and I think there'll be people listening who may be thinking about these stories, and particularly the story with this incredibly powerful person of such immense power and privilege that it's unimaginable, who just unfortunately happened to have the brain the size of a pea. How could you possibly confronted him in that moment? It's not even really about me confronting that person, or even though I could have, but it was certainly about going to the victims of his racism after it.
Yeah.
And just doing what you said, you know.
That's probably a big part of it, isn't it? Like the thought of taking on someone that in that moment, like you're not going to be able to. They'll take him away, and you're never going to win that. But you can absolutely show love and support to, and the connection you probably get from that would be huge.
I know I would have been sacked on the spot. It didn't.
Yeah.
It didn't matter though, really. You know, like it shouldn't have mattered.
The thing that is very clear with you, Ben, and since becoming friends with you, the thing that has become very apparent, and the thing that I really, really respect in you, is that while you have high expectations of people, which are high compared to what most people's expectations are of people, however, they should be normal. That they should just be the expectations of people. You just expect people not to be dicks.
No, and please don't celebrate me for any of this.
No.
You know,
But I think the flip side of that, there's that element of it, but then also you really care about the people in your life and make a real effort, which is so obvious to me and to, I'm sure, everyone. You make a real effort to kind of show people that you do love them. And I just wonder whether that's always been in your life.
Thank you. That's so lovely and profoundly felt. And yes, that is my intention, and that is how I go. You know, and if you're friends with me, then you know I will express my love for you and tell you that I love you. And we don't, you know, have enough time on this planet to not say that and to not make people feel that way. You know, and that. You know, whenever I receive that kind of love, and I receive that love in return from you and from you and from you, and I think, you know, that can really grow something, and it develops friendships and relationships in more quickly and more meaningfully when you just express care consistently and love to the people around you. You know, I grew up in a small town, and so I came into the small town a little bit too late. You know, I came out of primary school into a small town, and all of the friendships in the small town had already been solidified. And I found it really difficult to make friends, to really join a friendship group, both as, you know, a 12, 13-year-old, and then again as an 18-year-old in a different town. And I think the lesson for that was feeling like you're alone, and that, you know, that you're not of much value. And therefore later in life, when you have matured, and so have those people that are around you, you know, you just really want them to know that they matter. And maybe that does come from that, you know, that experience of being a young child and not having those kinds of friendships perhaps. But I think that, you know, it's just a great thing to be able to make somebody's day. But certainly I do feel like there's a finite time on this planet. Tomorrow is too far in the future to start being kind. You know, it's just not like, if I go today, have I told you that I love you? Have I told you that I think you're really awesome? I hope I have, and I hope that's what you remember of me. You know, not what I've done, but I guess how I made you feel.
It's just sort of occurred to me that, unlike many other chefs, you've resisted opening other restaurants. You've got Attica, but then I'm sure
Just a little thing.
Just a little,
yeah, it is a little thing. It's just a little
mar and
business.
par business. But you've got Attica, but then like obviously what happens with chefs, particularly when they become well known, is there'd be so many offers coming in from new hotels or this place
start
here.
the restaurant chain in the airport and all that stuff.
Yeah. And that's a great. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But I've always found it interesting that it's just Attica. But the thing that's hearing you talk now, the thing that's also sort of I'd never thought about is that how can you care for the people who are there, whether they be like staff or diners? How can you care for them all properly, like which is important to you, if there are 12 restaurants?
I can't, and if I had 2, I would be 50% less care for them, and they need to know I care.
On mentioning love and telling people that you love them, I've noticed this thing recently where men in my life, friends who I've had for a very long time, who would 10 years ago would never have said that we love each other, it's starting to happen. Like I got a message from a mate on Saturday, and yeah, he was a bit drunk, but he's dipping his toes into the water.
When he got drunk so he could send that message.
yeah, maybe he was drinking all day to send it. But I know the guy well, and I know this is a big step for him to put those words in a concrete form like a text. And it felt great, and it felt great to write it back. And I've noticed it being said amongst friends a lot more. There's something happening with male friendships, and it's a really lovely thing. And I don't know what the question from this is, but I think people like yourself, there are many other people out there who are showing a better way of doing it. It's a really special time and a thing to be a part of, and it feels good to say it.
It does, and I would say that you should be able to tell a male or a female friend that you love them. And then sometimes I think it's even more awkward to tell a female friend that you love them and just mean it in a platonic way, And I can think of an example just very recently where I've got this rather stoic friend and she's absolutely brilliant and I know she loves me, like deeply. It's a tremendous friendship. And then the other day I said to her, we'd had this amazing experience where we went hiking. And at the end of it, I said, oh, that was just so great. Love you. She looked shocked. She actually reeled, right? Like kind of, and I was cool with it because, I kind of knew that would be the reaction. But the next time I saw her, she said, I love you too. And so, it does take a bit of a leap of faith to say that to somebody, I think. And to not say it in a flippant way, but to look at somebody in the eyes and know that that you really mean what you're saying. And, my oldest friend, I remember the first time I said it to him, Jason, he's the best dude and it's a deep love. And I said, I love you. And he was also kind of shocked. But then I think the next text, a few days later was, I love you, bro, And so sometimes, it's just upon us to take a bit of a love risk.
Well, it's sort of like we've sort of grown up thinking like dropping the L word is such a huge moment in a relationship that you kind of reserve it for like the right. It's like, oh, am I ready to say it? I'm ready. So then now we're at a place where we're saying it to our friends. It's like, this feels crazy. Like I'm out on the edge here.
Well, Ryan is so out on the edge that Ryan says to us, I'm in love with you.
Oh, wow.
Well, I love you.
That is gnarly.
Yeah. I felt like I love you wasn't enough. So it's like, Hugh, I'm in love with you. It just felt right. Yeah. Ben, I'm in love with you too.
Oh, Ryan, I'm in love with you too. Josh, lots of love. We'll get there. Actually, that's pretty pathetic. I love you, Josh.
Yeah. I'm in love with you, Ben.
I'm in love with you too. Yeah. Oh, okay, all right. Hope Kylie doesn't listen to this. No.
Josh, I want to sleep with you.
It's too far.
This is now getting fun. Let's see what happens.
Let's play around.
Let's get some drinks. Turn the lights down. Let's actually just play with this. Okay. But so in all seriousness, Ben, is there? So with you're a very in such a good way, such a sensitive person, but has there ever been like a time, like obviously like with us, it's hopefully very easy to be sensitive, but has there ever been a time where it's been, I don't know, like your sensitivity's been challenged or your ability to be sensitive or?
Unfortunately, much of my life. Yeah. When I entered the kitchen, I thought that was, I felt like an outsider. I've always felt like a bit of a weirdo, in all honesty, and when I entered the kitchen, I thought this would be a home for me. But in fact, it was sort of a misogynistic bro club, and so I'd grown up with an incredibly beautiful, sensitive father who cried often and expressed himself to his family and was so gentle and nurturing. And that's who I wanted to be in part. You know, I have a bit of my mother's edge as well, who's an incredibly kind person too. And when I came into the kitchen, you know, that wasn't how you be, you know. And so for the largest part of my life, I've been made to feel like being a sensitive, caring man had no value. And there was a really strange moment, and I'm a little bit reluctant to talk about it in the context of a broader conversation, which we haven't had today. But I was in Copenhagen giving a speech at the height of Me Too, which is a weird thing for a man to do, I will admit. And a lot of men were reflecting upon their behaviors and looking for a way forward, and they all of a sudden turned to me in this situation. And I felt sad. You know, I felt like, oh, but you never cared before. You know, of course, some people cared, but generally you never seem to care. And now that the mirror has been held up to you and your behavior and your wrong way of thinking, you're looking at me. And so there was just this brief moment, which was, you know, this really unpopular part of me had become all of a sudden something that was valued. I quickly got over myself, I should admit, because I owed it to women to not sulk about it, but to in fact go, well, you know what, my responsibility is to other men, you know, and to actually kind of amplify that side of me, you know, to show people that haven't had the same childhood as I did or the same benefits, that there is more than one way to be a man, you know, and so, yeah, I guess I've struggled with that all of my life, you know, and that's why it's amazing to come on to shows like this, because it's a safe place, you know, and to have relationships with other men who, you know, are open and kind and value that in a person, you know.
I'm still it's taking me, and I think I've spoken to you a few times about it, but it reminds, and then maybe this is part of the reason, is Anthony Bourdain's book Kitchen Confidential, which talks about that those sort of early, you know, for want of a better term, like rock star chef days, where it did feel very kind of broy and very macho, and certainly from what I could tell from reading it, not like a sensitive environment.
No, that was an environment that he writes about in that book with the extreme toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And that is unforgivable to me, because when I read that book, that part of that book, I just couldn't find myself. And this is the way that we're portraying kitchens, and by biting cruelty to women, you know. And I think the effects of that book are still being felt on our industry. And, you know, you can't help but believe that book offered significant justification for appalling behavior from men who were seeking it.
Bit of an abstract one, but how do you define success in life?
It's probably defined by this conversation, by having loving, meaningful relationships where real things happen.
Well, you are a successful man.
Well, thank you. And so whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's running a restaurant or, you know, having a plumbing business or making a book, it doesn't really matter. It's always going to be about the joy with the people that you make it with. And, you know, and I will try to bring as many people into those sorts of passions as possible, because it just enriches it. It expands your mind and your perspectives. But always just trying to go with love, you know, really trying to go with love and trying to keep the mean side of me in check, you know. And we all have that. That's a thing, you know. But just in every interaction, trying to do the best, and knowing that sometimes I won't meet my own expectations of myself, and that's okay. But we get another shot.
Just on the topic of the book, I can't not mention this. It's just, I had dinner at your place the other day, and Eric Jensen was there, award-winning journalist who helped you with the editing of the book. And he said something which I honestly can't stop thinking about. He said when he was a young boy, his dad told him that when the Mr. Whippy van was playing music, that meant he was out of ice cream. And
Oh my
I
God.
thought about it so much. I just had to bring it up because I want everyone else to think about that now for quite some time.
That's hilarious.
Just going, the ice cream. Oh no, they're out.
I reckon that's a clever way of telling a child without telling a child that I can't afford an ice cream for you.
Very good.
Eric is my pen pal, and we call each other pen pal, and we write to each other a couple of times a week, sometimes several times a week. Take the time to write a letter, and
Oh, like literal letters.
yeah, and
Not about the book.
No,
Wow.
no. This is separate to any professional relationship that we've got going on.
Oh.
Which is always about writing or cooking. So this is just about sharing one beauty each day, and so we select something that we find profoundly moving, and it could be a painting. It could be a song. It might be a story from life. For me, it could often be something to do with, a child, not a child, one of my children. And we write about it, and sometimes those emails, are about something intensely hard, but the rule is that there's always a beauty,
Do you think, and maybe this is just inbuilt in anyone who grows up working in kitchens, but have you always, because you're so good at acknowledging the people that you work with and the team around you, and it's, you're very reluctant, if ever, to claim sole responsibility or praise for anything that you do. But is that something you think you've got better at? Because I think it's very tempting as a creative person, particularly when you're younger, to want people to think that you're the one who's done it. It's my restaurant, it's my creations and my genius. Has that always been inbuilt in you, or has it?
Professional cooking's not an individual occupation. If you think of the kitchen, you'd be better thinking about a professional sports team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is really the mentality in a really great kitchen. So that's kind of the culture that I grew up in. The one thing that I am totally prepared to claim solely are our mistakes. Because as the owner of the company, that the buck stops with me. And even if it's been an individual within a team that's made the mistake, I will analyze the ways in which I failed that individual, why we ended up there. It was probably more likely or not because we didn't train them to the level that they needed to be, or they weren't supported. And so even in that situation, I will admit my culpability, and I think that's the responsibility of owners of companies and leaders of teams to take it on the chin.
Absolutely.
It also reflects how we started, the taking it on the chin. Like and telling the story of your interaction not interaction, you're witnessing Prince Philip being appalling. You've taken it on the chin and used that as a motivating factor to change and improve.
Yeah, and I have no excuses for it. There's nothing I can say to change what happened. But I don't have to live like I can't improve as a human. That's the main thing that I want people to take away, is that we're all on some sliding scale of good and bad.
Well, yeah, it's beautiful. So often failures will define us in a negative way, but the way you're, and I hope you don't mind me calling it a failure, but
oh no, it was a complete failure.
Yeah, the way you're taking a failure to improve yourself is such an incredible lesson. Such an incredible thing. Yeah. What a
Thank
gift.
you, Josh.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful place to end. The book is Uses for Obsession, and we've just got a very, very small taste of what it's about, but it's an incredible book, and there are so many. I've found myself at the end of each chapter reflecting on my life and the way I'd respond in similar situations. And it's the kind of book that I think just sort of makes you a better person with the life lessons that are within it. So it is extraordinarily well written, and it is so heartfelt and so honest, as are you. And you're a beautiful person, and it's just been a pleasure to chat to you again, Ben Shewry.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so honoured.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.